Welcome to Santaroga Surplus. This is the next part, final part of the disassembly of the Vz.50 and 70 series pistols. Now, I was down to the sear and the safety on the last video, and I put things back together a little bit to take a little look at stuff. So we're going to pull this off again. One of the things to note when you are working with this side plate is that it doesn't always come off very easily. The metal is fairly thick, so a slight angle makes a change. So you need to make sure that your trigger pivot pin is far enough down, or all the way out from the other side. Depends on how you're doing it, but far enough down, okay, that it's not going to interfere with what you're doing when you pop this off. And it is kind of a press fit, okay? Like I said the first time, there's a lip on the side plate that goes into the frame right there, and then the whole thing comes down. And because you're swinging a door closed, there's kind of some little funky aspects of the fit that you have to get. See? I just pulled it off and they're still... And when you do it, because of spring pressure, you may find that the sear wants to come off at an angle a little bit, so you're going to push it very slightly and make sure that the pin lines up before you clamp this down. And to keep this clamped down, you're going to have to eventually put the nut back on from the barrel pin. Okay? Right now, everything's fine. So, take it off. You'll remember that the trigger bar is attached with a spring, or attached to a spring, that you have to come down. Then you can pull this out. It's got a pin that will pull out, and that is what holds the the trigger spring that you're unhooking. It's held in that. Okay? So when you pull the trigger all the way off, if this pin comes out, that hairpin spring is going to come out. It's not hard. It's really easy. It only goes in one way. There's nothing to it. It's a spring, and putting springs back in can be a little bit tricky. You'll remember that the hammer pin pops out after the trigger bar, which connects in there, is pulled out. So you can't punch this out until the trigger bar is off. Hammer. Okay, and you're left with just these two pieces. And there's a pin here for the trigger. That's your pivot pin. You'll want to pull that out if you're doing a refinish, but don't think I'm doing anything significant to this one except for the video series and getting all of the cosmoline out. So, with your sear, you're going to want to push the pin the other side. And if I remember right, you got to fold the safety back a little bit, just a little bit past their normal fire position. And it may press, you may have to tap it. I'm going to have to tap it. Once the pin is out, the whole sear comes out. The sear has a spring, a hairpin spring, right there. The short arm goes on top of the sear where this trigger release is. or the firing pin retainer release. Whatever. And then this is going to have to slide back into the frame and down when you reassemble. It's a little bit tricky. Not too hard, but a little bit tricky. Then you've got, what's left is the safety. The safety has, all the way down in the undetectable spot, the safety has a pin with a spring. It's a spring-loaded pin. It's right in here. Right in here. And you are, when you pop the safety up past a certain point, because you can spin the thing all the way around, you're going to hear that pop. It's not going to come out, but you're going to hear it pop. And then at that point you can see it. You can push it down. And slide the safety back around. You need to know that's there, because as you start pushing the safety out, and it just slides right out, you're going to have to catch that and at some points press it down. Once you see it, it's pretty obviously there. And you have to continue to press it down in stages as you get the safety out. See, it came free again, so I've got to poke it down to get the right hand part of the safety out. As far as I could tell, looking at it myself, there's no way to actually get the spring out, the pin and the spring out, before you've got the safety all the way out. And this is the part where it pops. And there it is. It's a pin and a spring. They're pretty firmly attached, so they shouldn't come loose. And it goes into a hole in the frame. That's your safety. Everything is out, unless you want to run that pin the rest of the way out. This is it. You can do anything you want. Press the barrel out, paint, refinish, clean up the Cosmoline. I've cleaned up most of the Cosmoline, so I'm in pretty good shape right now. And go ahead and we'll do a little bit of reassembly. We have reassembled parts as we've taken them off throughout most of this video series. So I'm not going to do a whole lot. You just need to do a checklist of everything you took out in order, put it back. So I put that spring back in the hole, get my safety, get it started. Then I've got to take something. Whoop, I just launched it. That's fun. This is why I make my flat bars. They don't slip as much. You got to push this down. Far enough to get the safety started. And then, depending on your rotation, how much pressure you're putting on, you're just going to have to kind of walk it in a step at a time. And in a minute or two. You'll have the safety back in. And this is just kind of the way it is with this. You gotta get it there. Now you're not going to be able to flip this around without pressing that back down because it's not in its catch area. The pin is sticking, there's no way for you to see that. The pin is sticking up. So to rotate this, you're going to have to put the pin down far enough to click the safety over, and at that point you're good. Safe, you've got the decocker function, but don't use it because you're just going to pop the pin right back out. Just leave it on fire and you're fine for now. Now this pin you may have to clean up depending on how you've treated it during the work. All of these pins are just pins. If you want to replace them, just measure the diameter and replace them. They're not that hard. I've got this one moving pretty freely for part of the length. So I'm going to put it flush here, and I'm going to get, this is your sear. This is the part that sticks up when the sear is released to allow the firing pin to move. That is your key for this. You're going to put that in its slot way up here and push your hairpin spring so that you've got tension on it. And then you're just going to use your fingers, line it up with the hole, and push. Hopefully not with putting a hole in your finger. How? Just got to get the pin to that hole, at which point just a gentle tap will keep it there. So now we've got it there. We can start the main reassembly at this point. And we're going to start with the hammer. Put the hammer in. Whatever lubricants, cleaning you're doing, all that you've got to do. The hammer is going to have to be pushed just a little bit. It's got a little bit of pressure on the sear, very slight. And your hammer pin, which remember is keyed on this side. So you want to line that up. Get it started. Turn it over, line that up. So you're in there with the key and just push it. It'll wiggle a little bit and it'll go all the way in. You may have to tap it with a rubber hammer, probably not. So that's in there, and that will move the sear a little bit. Next, you're going to want to put your trigger on. If you haven't released the spring, good. If you have, you're going to start by putting the spring in this way on the top hole. You're going to put this pin in. This is a free floating pin. This will not stick unless you have a glob of grease on it, which is not a bad idea. This is not an easy to oil part. Slide it right on there. You have to make sure that this inside of the hairpin is here, so it's going to press on that. Start putting that on its pin, the pivot pin. Then you're going to have to push the rest of the hairspring pin down into its channel. Okay, at that point, trigger bar. Now remember that you've got to pull the spring down. That's not my trigger bar. Trigger bar. Pull it down and let it come up here. So that pushes on the trigger bar. Okay? Slide your trigger bar in here into the slot in the hammer pin. Okay? This bent part of the trigger bar right here rides under the hammer, and that's what puts the pressure on the hammer to do your double action trigger pull. Okay? That's going to pull the hammer when you're doing double action. See? That's pretty much that for the internals. At this point, you should be able to put your plate back on. Now, you're going to have to line up with that pin. You're going to have to line that pin up. So you want to work it as much as you can. The big problem you're going to have getting it closed all the way here is that the pressure of the spring is going to slide. Remember I told you about this. Is going to slide the sear pin backwards a little bit. So you're just going to push it a little straight, push in. Everything is on now. Okay? That little lip is holding the front. Your fingers are holding the back. Put your nut on, but don't tighten it all the way. Finger tight. Finger tight. Now you're going to have to do a little bit of tapping. To make sure that this pin, because it's got to sit inside both rails, okay? But it's got to be in both holes. It's kind of a finicky pin, because it's just not long enough to protrude from both sides, because the rail has to sit and ride on there. This pin is your trigger pivot pin. One good whack should get it started, and you're there. You can finish this off. And everything should function if you pull the trigger. It should catch everywhere. I'm having a distinct lack. See, I'm not riding on the right spot because my trigger bar is not releasing, is not pushing. There it goes. Cocked, release. So that's that. The only thing you have to check on that is to make sure that the hairpin spring is fully down and engaged, because that's what's giving your sear the return pressure it needs. That's pretty much that for this part. You may want to thread lock this, you may not. You definitely want to ensure that it's a little bit more than finger tight, because this is holding your frame together at this point. Springs and springs. Everything else you've probably seen. Just remember that when you're doing the frame, you want to determine if you want your drop-free magazine or not. That goes. If you want to keep this, the lip comes out right here. and just goes into its slot. Not hard. This just goes, slides right up in there. Remember, this has a cutout to sit on the spring, so it's really easy to get it started. It'll tend to catch like that. A little bit of upward pressure on the outside, and it just snaps right into place. Everything works. You know what we didn't do? Ha! Did this 3 times. Knew I was going to do it again. Because I missed it at least twice. We did not put the magazine catch back in, and you have to have the side plate off to put the magazine catch in. Magazine catch has its spring, and it just goes right there, but you have to do it the right way. That gives you a little pressure when you're putting this back on, because there's a spring sitting right there. But realistically, it takes about 30 seconds. You could do this very easily with a nut driver. You don't need to torque it that much. Maybe a little bit though. Make sure your pins are still good. There we go. Now you even have a magazine catch. Isn't that amazing? This is going to go back in the same way it came out. Might as well. This is the larger of the springs that you have left, I believe. Yep. Remember, this is the slightly funky screw. I'm going to go ahead and get it started. Makes it a lot easier to get it on if it is started a little bit. It does take a minute, and it gets really hard on your thumb. Eventually, you decide to stop being lazy and get your clip. Kind of out of things to say. I have a lot of dead air right now, but I've told you everything I know about this. So apparently, according to Tim over on the Military Arms channel, something I did not know and had never checked out, the magazine release button is thinner on the Vz.70 series than it is on the Vz.50 series. So this, being a 50, would have a taller release than a 70, or yeah, than a 70. This one is a 50 and it's tall. This is a 70 and it's short. This is a 50 and it's short. A lot of these parts got replaced periodically. This one also has a hollow hammer spur. So it's had all of the parts, even though this is it's medium production. It's not really early production. So that's in. This is your next part right here. This is your slide lock lever. There's one more spring which goes in there. Right in there. Okay? And you gotta get this on top of it. Get it to sit right there. And this is your last pin. I want to be a little bit cautious with this one. It should start fairly easily. And I think this is one that was started life narrower to feed in, and then got expanded at the end of the initial insertion process. You can see there's a little dimple inside there where they did expand it. So it can be a little tough to get it to start. But once you got it, nope. I still don't have it. I may have to taper it a little bit. Once you've got it started, it should go in very fast. These are actually relatively soft pins as far as they go. Removing material is never the ideal way to do it. But in this case, as much as anything, I'm folding it. And if you wanted to, you could probably take a hammer and just sort of kind of work it in a little bit. Once you've got it started, it's not too hard to finish. That is that. Your barrel pin is back in. If you want to, you can take that, get that flat, take a pointed punch, kind of poke the end of that, and that tightens the rivet in there. So it's not ever going to come out, because that is your barrel pin. It rivets the barrel pin, so to speak. That's really pretty close to all we got. I'm going to replace the grip panels with my unbroken ones. And we will eventually get ourselves out to the range and do a range video with some of these. Although I feel kind of weird if you do watch the Military Arms channel. Right after I started this video series, he put out a video just a couple days ago, that has him shooting hundreds of rounds out of these. A couple things he doesn't talk about, but most of them he does. Okay, the screw could use a little bit more work. I was lazy. Working my video. The reason I was lazy is because this is probably the most annoyingly time-consuming screwdriver process I have had since I owned a Volkswagen Beetle. There we go. Spring, fat end out, thin end in. Cock the hammer. There you are. Back together. Everything works. And we'll do a deep dive into function if we need to, but that's it. We have completely stripped every last component out of a Vz.50 or 70 pistol, and we've replaced all of it. Bonus! Have a good one.